Greetings, everyone, and wherever you are, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Joy Connolly. I'm honored to serve as president of the American Council of Learned Societies, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to this HBCU faculty webinar, fellowship and grant opportunities in the humanities and interpretive social sciences. It's really an honor and a delight to host you today. I will keep my remarks very short because I know you're eager to get to the main event. I'm going to hand it over to Senior Director for U.S. Programs, John Paul Christie, in a moment. Before I do, let me just place this event in context and thank the many people involved who are all involved in the work of bringing HBCUs, faculty, administrators, students into the ambit of ACLS in a way that in an enhanced way from past decades and past generations, in a way that we're very proud of and enormously excited about. HBCUs are, we believe, and you in the audience know very well, are really the backbone of American higher education. You represent in your commitment to students, your commitment to service, to student success, to equity and justice, to the advancement of knowledge and engaged knowledge, participatory research in communities, and a dozen other factors. You represent exemplars, really models for American higher education as a whole. And it was in recognition of that role that ACLS in the last year made a major push to reach out to historically Black colleges and universities, some of whom had been members of ACLS's associate college university network in the past, some not, but we wished in recognition of your historic excellence and ongoing and future contributions to the texture of scholarly and of scholarly life and research in the humanities and interpretive social sciences. We wanted to ensure that there was full participation from HBCUs in our networks that were largely set up in the 1960s and 1970s. So we're very proud to have welcomed 11 new members, HBCU members, to our Associates Network, and to continue the membership of 2 past memberships this year. The reason for this, kind of deep reason behind our effort to ensure inclusivity in our member networks, is that the scholarly voices from HBCUs in particular we see as key to the advancement of humanistic understanding, and particularly in areas of urgent contemporary public interest. And I think there are so many different angles and ways in which scholars illuminate contemporary questions of race, of justice, of American history and identity, of language, of art, music, and other cultural pursuits. I feel a bit embarrassed even trying to list them all because their richness and diversity, we all know very well. But as I say, the scholarly voices from HBCUs are key to advancing our understanding of human activities, behavior, and history. And it's for that reason we felt it urgent to begin on a path and continue other paths of engagement with HBCUs. So this event is, we know, the first of various kinds of engagements with the HBCU community, to which we look forward. Thank you again for participating and giving your precious time and energy to us today. And with that, I turn it over to John Paul Christie, our Senior Director for U.S. Programs, and I thank all our panelists in advance.
Thank you, Joy. I am so glad that you could welcome us all here today and set the stage for us. I am going to be introducing our panelists in just a moment. I just wanted to thank all of you for attending this webinar today, which we conceive of as a workshop, one way to introduce you to a number of different funders in the humanities and humanistic social sciences, and also an opportunity for us to discuss and to answer questions that you might have, and to answer some commonly asked questions about our programs that help tease out some strategies for writing successful proposals for our various competitions. I think it's fairly clear to all attendees about why you should be applying for fellowship and grant funding. The funding itself is one of the key reasons, but there are others. And among them are the opportunity that an application presents you to refine arguments and ideas, things that you're working on in your research that you'd like to advance. And writing a proposal is a very good way of doing that, having to crystallize some of your thoughts, your arguments in one spot. The translation of those ideas, making sure that those are communicating with other audiences, particularly the peer reviewers that we work with, but thinking more broadly about the ways that these ideas can be enacted in different kinds of publications. And then finally, the participation in peer review and the greater exposure of your work among the scholarly community that entails. And so that happens whatever the outcome of the application. We think that it's really important for scholars from every sector, every kind of college, university, that we want the scholars there to be participating in this, what is very much a national conversation around humanistic and interpretive social science research. And this is one way to do it. So with that, I would like to move the conversation over to introduce our panelists. I'll start by introducing my colleague, Matthew Booker from the National Humanities Center. He is Vice President for Scholarly Programs, followed by Keelan Burke, the Director of Fellowship and Academic Programs at the Newberry Library in Chicago, Mary Macklem, who's the Senior Program Officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and Daniela Sarnoff, Program Director for the International Dissertation Research Fellowship Program at the Social Science Research Council. I will turn it over right now, or first to my colleague, Mary Macklem from the NEH, who will introduce you to the National Endowment for the Humanities and the opportunities for fellowships and grants there. Mary?
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are today. Thank you so much for coming today. So I first off just want to thank the ACLS staff for inviting me and NEH to participate today. I appreciate having the opportunity to connect with each of you and to introduce NEH funding opportunities. And please feel free to contact me at any time with any questions. That's what I am here for. We're always here to help. And if we don't know the answer about an NEH question, we're happy to find a appropriate colleague who will be able to do that. The National Endowment for the Humanities, or NEH, is a government agency dedicated to the humanities. The agency supports projects in all areas of the humanities through grant programs for research, education, preserving and providing access to humanities materials, providing opportunities for public engagement, the digital humanities, and infrastructure such as building renovations. And we have over 35 grant programs. Today, I'm going to focus on funding opportunities for individual scholars. Lastly, all of the applications submitted to NEH go through a peer review process, and you can find out more about that process on our website, which is neh.gov. In addition, if you would like to be considered to serve as an NEH peer review panelist, please do sign up on our website, and I have the link for you there, and it will show again at the end of the slides. So as you can see from this slide, NEH offers several different programs in support of individuals. In most cases, allowable use of funds can include things such as living expenses, course buyouts, salary replacement, and travel expenses. Indirect costs are not allowed. While each of these programs support individuals pursuing humanities research or writing or both, the focus or outcome of the project may be different. In the interest of time, I will just mention a few to give you an idea of the range of fellowship support available through the NEH. The Awards for Faculty program, for example, aims to strengthen the humanities at HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, and tribal colleges and universities. Funded research can support undergraduate course revisions, community or institutional goals, or books and articles. The Fellowships Program, the second program on the list, also supports individual scholars pursuing research in the humanities. Awards made in this program typically support book projects. Born Digital Humanities Research and Publication can be supported by the NEH Mellon Fellowships for Digital Publication Program, while the Summer Stipends Program supports 2 months of full-time work. And a final example is the Public Scholars Program, which supports well-researched books in the humanities intended to reach a broad audience of general readers. Pictured on the left of the slide are 3 books, each supported in part by NEH. Overground Railroad by Candace E. Taylor was supported through the Public Scholars Program. Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom by Stephen Platt was supported through the Summer Stipends Program. And Unbinding Gentility by Candace Bailey was supported through the awards for faculty at HBCU's program. Lastly, NEH also supports independent research centers in offering fellowships to individual scholars, both domestic and international. And the Schomburg Center at the New York Public Library and the American Academy in Rome, for example, offer NEH-funded fellowships. Visit the NEH website to see which centers are currently receiving NEH funding. If you have questions about which programs might fit your project best, please call NEH staff. That's what we're here for. And I would also recommend that you look at the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the guidelines for each program. The Notice of Funding Opportunity includes information on project types, eligibility, and application format. And we also provide sample applications and other materials for you to consult as you prepare your applications. In closing, please reach out if you have any questions, or I can provide further information about our grant programs. I have also placed some other links for you here, including a link to a series of virtual webinars the agency's been giving this spring. The webinar last week, in fact, was on individual grant programs. So if you needed more details on any of those programs in slide 2, that might be a helpful place to turn. And the one on April 8th was tailored to the HBCU community across the agency's grant programs. Thanks so much once again for having me here today. And with that, I'm sorry, I'll turn that over to Matthew Booker from the National Humanities Center.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to join you and the American Council for Learned Societies today, and all of you out there in the ether. I'm going to share my screen as well. Good. There are my slides, always handy to have those. The National Humanities Center is the oldest and still the only major independent institute for advanced study in the world that is dedicated solely to the humanities. Since our founding in 1978, we've been supporting humanities scholars to come to North Carolina to work on serious, sustained scholarship, and to do so in a warm and invigorating community of fellows. In the past 42 years, over 1,400 fellows have worked in residence here. They have produced over 1,600 books, as well as numerous other scholarly works. At the center, we value the diversity of disciplines, perspectives, and viewpoints across the expanding world of the humanities. You can see that remarkable diversity in the list of fellows on our website, nationalhumanitiescenter.org, which is also a kind of timeline of the emergence of new fields like women's and gender studies, Latin American studies, environmental humanities, and Africana studies. So, what do you get as a fellow? First, we pay stipends to support you financially while you're on sabbatical leave at the center. We provide you with a room of your own to work in. Our librarians provide world-best reference services and will get you any printed material you wish. Our 2 chefs provide daily lunches and breakfast where you will mingle with other scholars from around the world. We offer a number of professional development opportunities throughout the year. And most of all, we provide a supportive community of scholars drawn from across the humanities who can provide you with lifelong references and a sense of community as you move forward into the world of scholarship. So I want to say something about our application next. The center begins accepting applications on July 1st of each year, and our deadline in 2021 is October 7th. The application website is on the right side of this slide, and frequently asked questions, which I strongly recommend, are on the bottom right side of this slide. The application requires a 1,000-word project proposal. It includes a short bibliography up to 2 pages of supporting materials, materials that will help to support the application for your proposed work of scholarship. We ask for a CV, a sort of resume of your academic work, and that's up to 4 pages. And then I think critically, a 1-page tentative outline of the structure of your project. So this is typically the chapters that you imagine writing. And the reason for those details, which by the way are are explained in much greater detail on our application website, is that we have a 3-stage process for choosing our evaluations. Our applications are first assigned to 500 reviewers from around the world, many of whom are drawn from former fellows at the center, but all of whom are experts in their fields. And then the top scoring applications are sent on to our selection committee of scholars who are also often experts in their fields. So it's the selection committee itself that selects our fellows and forwards those finalists the good news. And so the important point of this is that any application for a fellowship both needs to speak to the details of expertise in the field, that is to speak to your own discipline, but it also needs to appeal to make a claim to a broader audience, to tell us why it matters that your scholarship should be funded. Also helpful in making a strong application is to consider the ways that you can reach that broader audience, to tell us why your project matters, as I said before, and also to avoid jargon, to know that your readers include a selection committee drawn from disciplines other than your own. You should also tell us where you are in your project. Tell our reviewers that you're ready to write, that you're ready to be funded to support a year in residence as a writer, not just to do research. And then finally, a word about letters of recommendation and references. Make sure that your 3 references understand your project and can talk about it. It's much more important to have a thoughtful letter than it is to have a letter from a big name. And that is often, I think, especially important for those of us who are proposing a book project for the first time, to understand that the work we do is explained through our own application, but that our letter writers can be powerful advocates on our part, not because they are famous, or if they are not famous, that's somehow a detriment, but rather that they can explain our project in ways that we ourselves may not. So be certain that your letter writers are familiar with your work and can back you as your champion. So I look forward to your questions in the question and answer session, but I want to underscore a crucial point, which is that the National Humanities Center strives to represent the diversity of scholarship and of disciplines and of scholars out there in the world. It's very important to us that we represent that through the applications we receive and through the actual committees and communities of scholars we support. And I would hope that you would visit our website and have a look at this year's class of fellows and also at recent year's class of fellows, all of whom are listed under the people section of our website. And you can see there quite viscerally, I think, how we represent that diversity of perspective, of discipline, and also demographic diversity, and how we hope to do more of that. So we welcome applications from scholars at historically Black colleges and universities. Okay, I would like to turn over the microphone now to my colleague, Keelan Burke from the Newberry Library.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Hi, everybody. I'm Keelan Burke, Director of Fellowships and Academic Programs at the Newberry Library, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to share with you some details about the Newberry's Fellowship Program, the library, and about Independent Research Library Fellowships. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. I'm going to talk to you about fellowships at the Newberry and other programs. I'd like to, of course, say thank you very much to the ACLS for inviting us, and to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day this afternoon or evening, wherever you may be joining us from, to hear about these opportunities. So for those of you unfamiliar with the Newberry Library, we are an independent research library located in Chicago, Illinois. We are a humanities library, and our collection here at the Newberry holds some 1.6 million books, over 500,000 maps, and 5 million manuscript pages from the Middle Ages to the present. We host researchers and visitors to work in our collections, visit exhibitions, attend events, and use our digital resources. Fellowships are a foundational piece of the Newberry's scholarly community. You've already heard from Mary and Matt about some fellowship opportunities at the NEH and the NHC. Like Matt at the National Humanities Center, the Newberry offers residential fellowships, which means that you get to come spend time in lovely Chicago, Illinois, working in our collection. Residential fellowships, research libraries like the Newberry are a little bit different from the kinds of programs that have been that you've heard about so far at the NEH and the NHC. The biggest difference is that most fellowships at research libraries require applicants to demonstrate a need to work specifically in the collections of those libraries. And so why would somebody be interested in applying for a fellowship at a residential library? Well, I'm going to tell you about that this afternoon. There are a few things that I would like to highlight. One of those is the time. So the fellowship is very important in the time that it gives the scholar and researcher to work on their projects, time away from their other, the other necessary things that you do in your day-to-day job, whether it's working or teaching, whether it's those service components of a lot of most of your positions. A fellowship at a residential library gets you away from those to focus just on the research of the project that you're working on right now. Another piece of that is space. So at the Newberry in particular, we have research carrels for each and every fellow that comes into the library. So whether it's a long-term fellow or a short-term fellow, you have a dedicated space that is your very own for all of the time that you are working here at the library. Another really important piece of it is community. So the community at the Newberry and other research libraries is a community of scholars writ large. It is the fellows, it is the research and fellowships and scholarly staff, it is the librarians, the archivists, the curators. Many research libraries have a sort of local library and academic affiliates who come and are part of that scholarly community. And so when you come to a research library, you're not only using the resources in the library and in the stacks, but you're using the resources by building communities and networks among other scholars who may be working in areas that are very similar to the projects that you're working on, or who may be working on projects very wide flung from what you're working on, but can have really amazing ways to sort of connect with people that you may not have had otherwise intellectually curious and fabulous people. And the last piece, which of course is a pretty central one at a research library, is the collection. So research libraries across the US and across the world many of us have very specific kinds of collections. The Newberry, we are a library that has strengths in a lot of different areas. So we have strengths in early modern and Renaissance studies. We also have Native American and Indigenous studies. We also host a whole lot of manuscript materials on Chicago and the Midwest. Other research libraries, like for example, the Folger Shakespeare Library, has a whole lot of material around Shakespeare. The research libraries, I think, are important to think of what your topic and your research fit is to find a good fit with the research library. Most research libraries have two kinds of fellowships, long and short term. The exact definitions of long and short can depend on the institution, but for example, at the Newberry, our long-term fellowships are 4 to 9 months, which is 1 to 2 semesters during the academic year. And we offer a stipend of $5,000 a month to individuals on those fellowships. For short-term fellowships, they're generally 1 month, sometimes 2, and those are thought of travel to collection fellowships. So that means that for this month, you'll be extensively working in the Newberry's collections. Short-term fellowships come with a stipend of $3,000 a month, which is meant to cover housing and travel to Chicago for a month. I would like to then talk about some tips for applications at research libraries in particular. One is to think about researching the collection. So each research library has its own strengths and its own unique collections. So I would encourage you to poke around on those catalogs, read through those, the footnotes and those materials that you really want to see and find where those are, and then investigate those at the various libraries that you're interested in. Second, I would say very much so to talk to the librarians and the archivists and the curators. Beyond the collections, the greatest resource at a research library is the staff. There are amazing librarians, archivists, curators, and staff who work at these institutions who are absolutely thrilled to work with you to learn about your project and see how their collections can support that. You will see my very enthusiastic note that librarians are your friends, and I can guarantee that they absolutely are and are here to help you. My third note would be to tailor your applications to each individual institutions and collections. So we know that this is more work for the applicant, but we have found that more successful applicants have said specifically what is useful in these institutions, in these collections, that is a good fit with your project. And lastly, I would say, as Matthew and Mary have noted, is to ask questions, to feel free to get in touch with us. We are here to help make this process as transparent and as useful as possible as it is. We're here to answer your questions and help you make a successful application, and to help you give you pointers to where we can strengthen that. So feel free to email myself with questions. Research will put you to a wider net of Newberry research staff, and of course to email reference librarians. And I'm happy at the end to answer any specific questions about the Newberry or research libraries, and I look forward to the conversation. Thanks very much. I will now pass things off to Daniela Sarna from the Social Science Research Council.
Great, thank you to the ACLS and everybody out there. For better or for worse, I am not showing any slides. So sorry, you'll just be looking at me. SSRC is an almost 100-year-old international nonprofit. We're actually 2 years off from our centennial. And we support scholars, research, connect scholars with policy, and hope, of course, that that gets used for the public good. Despite our name, we do support the humanities, and of course, it's hard to break out of the social science aspect of the social science research, but we absolutely support the humanities as well. Some programs at the SSRC have found long-term homes there. Things like, happily, one of the programs I run, the International Dissertation Research Fellowship. Others like the Mellon Mays Graduate Initiative Program have been at SSRC for over 20 years. And some, I mean, it's a continuously changing group, right? We've had sort of one-off grants, if you will, and others that have had long-term homes. So that's another way of saying, do check back with the SSRC website, especially under its fellowships and programs page, to see what kind of things are going on. I wanted to mention in this brief time 3 programs that I hope would be perhaps the most relevant to some of the work being done, especially at HBCUs. The first one, and these also happen to come in order of their application deadline. So the first one is a small grant program called American Slavery's Legacy Across Space and Time. It is grants of up to $25,000 to support research into the impact of racial slavery of African Americans in the US today, through especially the lens of the Georgetown University 272 and their descendants. So again, like all SSRC programs, I mean, this is sort of, think about the broad implications. These are always interdisciplinary fellowships and programs that you'd be applying for, generally across the humanities and social sciences. That is due June 15th. And so I would urge you all to look at our site, connect specifically to the application information, and the FAQs on that. So that's one I wanted to mention. The second is called Just Tech Fellowships, and it comes out of an awareness of that technologies often reproduce existing structures of inequality. And so the Just Tech Fellowships want to fund critical research on the relationship of technological developments and power and social justice. And they are hoping, again, like all of our fellowships, really to foster a diverse intellectual community of researchers. And again, think broadly here. This is, open also certainly to scholars. I won't deny that for SSRC, sort of scholar faculty and graduate students at institutions is our perhaps largest area of reach, but something like Just Tech is open to artists, to journalists, funded by the Ford and MacArthur. These are 2-year awards of $100,000 a year. And the hope is really to create a more equitable technological future. So again, thinking broadly of implications across a wide range of disciplines, of an access point for any of you sitting out there, a connection to this. And then finally, the International Dissertation and Research Fellowship. Again, I run the program, so I feel somewhat compelled to plug it. It is offered to PhD students, so that may or may not be relevant to some of you. And we fund 6 to 12 months of on-site dissertation research for people, for PhD students doing research on non-US or on US indigenous cultures. And again, open to the broad spectrum across the social sciences and the humanities in that. I would say also then just general things to keep in mind about applying. I know I've repeated a number of times, these are always interdisciplinary. And as many of my colleagues who spoke before said, that does mean that the review process has people, the multi-tier review process, which differs slightly depending on the program, but I'm happy to say what I can about them. Always have scholars across different disciplines working in different regions at different institutional types. So in many ways, for any application, that is your audience. And so certainly to echo many of the things said, you want to be aware of your disciplinary language, jargon, that you want to make sure you are reaching across disciplines and are presenting an application that makes it clear that you're interested in sort of bridging some of those disciplinary divides. I would also say and again, people can ask questions, that on the SSRC website, one can find a PDF of a pamphlet essentially called The Art of Writing Proposals. It is old-ish, which is to say it was last revised in the 90s, but it's still quite relevant, which is why we continue to post it there. So again, I know at the end we may be forwarding things, happy to send that link specifically, but that does give a great deal of information just generally about writing proposals. And just on the topic, I know of things like reference letters, it really depends within the council whether reference letters are required. IDRF has gotten rid of letters of recommendation. So all of you no doubt aware of the conversations around implicit bias, prestige bias, gatekeeping. We have gotten rid of them. I believe the American Slavery's Legacy Across Space and Time Fellowship does not require one. As far as I recall as well, Just Tech asks for a potential reference if you get further into the review process. So also trying to be aware of the time it takes for reviewers to write those kinds of, for referees to write those kinds of letters. So those are just a couple of things. Again, 3 specific programs. As I said, I mean, things change frequently. I want to just add finally about Just Tech, because I mentioned the deadline for the American Slavery's Legacy was June 15th. Just Tech's deadline is August 30th. And I do know that that application is not yet live, so there's not going to be a great deal of information on our website about it, but it is in the works. So if you're interested in it, please make note of that. And that's it for me and SSRC, and back to John Paul Christie. Thank you all.
Thank you, Daniela. I'm very pleased to join this great group of presenters and to do a very brief overview of ACLS and to point you in some hopefully useful directions to find out more information about our programs. As my colleague Joy Connolly said, ACLS is a federation of 78 scholarly societies, and those represent a lot of major disciplines in the humanities and interpretive social sciences, but also a number of sub-disciplines and interdisciplinary fields. We turned 100 years old just a couple of years ago, and so we've been around for a while, and we've been funding scholarship in the humanities and social sciences for a long time as well. We are very much interested in advancing the scholarly ambitions of US and international scholars as they're advancing the humanities and advancing their fields. We run 14 different fellowship and grant programs as of this year. That number, as some of my colleagues have highlighted about the importance of checking out our website, that number can grow, can shrink, can change, including the kinds of programs that are that are available each year. So we encourage you to keep close tabs on what's going on our website there, so you can keep on top of what kinds of programs are developing. We provide across all those programs just over $25 million in support to about 400 individual scholars per year. We work with approximately 600 peer reviewers across all of those programs. Those 400 awardees are coming primarily from the United States, from institutions in the United States. They are coming from every kind of college and university, and from community colleges to research-intensive universities, to regional comprehensives and small liberal arts colleges. Our peer reviewers are also representing that broad swath of the diversity of U.S. higher education. They are coming from research universities, colleges, HBCUs, and community colleges as well, all of whom are joining with us in trying to advance the scholarly agenda of the applicants who are coming to us to present their research proposals. I wanted to focus primarily on one program in particular, the ACLS Fellowship Program. It's known as our central program because it's funded by ACLS's own endowment. We provided 60 awards in 2021, and those awards, very much like the NEH's fellowships, provide 6 to 12 months of support. They're designed to support a major scholarly project. That major scholarly project could be different based on the scholar's agenda, based on the scholar's discipline. It does not always mean this has to be a book. It could be any significant scholarly project that you are going to be devoting near full-time work through over 6 to 12 months. We provide $5,000 per month as the stipend, so that for 6 to 12 months, that's $30,000 to $60,000 in stipend. These funds are intended as salary replacement, meaning they are designed to sustain you as you're devoting full-time work to your research project. We are very interested in making sure that you can have the resources you need to advance this work. And one of the most sought after commodities is time to pursue projects, especially among scholars who are teaching a lot of courses at their institutions, teaching a lot of students. And so our current structure is to buy out that time so that you can advance those projects for 6 to 12 months. We fund projects at every stage of development, meaning that you could propose a project at the very beginning of its arc, something that you'd like to go out and do field research on, go out and do archival research to advance a project. You could be at the middle stage or towards the final stages of project development, meaning that you're writing up research. All of those kinds of projects are eligible. We, in the last year and this coming year, we have restricted eligibility for this program primarily for early career scholars who do not have tenure. This is because of the intense disruption caused by the pandemic. Traditionally, ACLS have been open to all career stages. Right now, this fellowship is very focused. But as I said, keep watching our website. This changes as conditions do in the academy. And the deadline for this is almost always in late September. So our calls for applications go up in July on our website. All the most up-to-date information is there, and you would submit a proposal on our online portal in September. Like my colleagues, many of them have described their peer review processes. Ours are similar. We see this as happening in 3 stages. When an application is submitted through our online reviewer system, ACLS staff, my colleagues and I will make sure that it is in fact meets our basic eligibility requirements, that you've submitted the right number, the right documents, a proposal that's the right length, that's not 10 pages over the page limit. And we are basically doing that to make sure that everything that can be comparable and everybody is on the same footing in terms of the formatting for the eligibility requirements. We then move on to hand these these many proposals over to a group of first-round peer reviewers. Those peer reviewers, as I mentioned, are coming from every kind of institution, every kind of background. They will include specialists in your field. So the first round of review, your project will be read by people who are, if you're a historian, an American historian of the 19th century, you'll have a 19th century American historian reading your application. We have 3 reviewers reading your application at that stage. The applicants who score highest in that round of review go on to a second round of review, and that panel stage, the final round, is interdisciplinary, meaning there are scholars from every kind of humanistic, social science discipline sitting around the table, reading finalist applications and having a conversation about which ones will be forwarded as awardees this year. That means the task for people applying for these programs is that you're going to have to demonstrate the stakes of your project, demonstrate what is important about your work, what are the stakes in the scholarly discourse, the arguments you're trying to make, why those are important. You're not just speaking to people within your discipline, but you're speaking to people outside of your discipline as well. Very briefly, we're going to go through some tips and strategies as a group in a little bit, but I wanted to just point you to the most important pieces of literature on ACLS's website. We have regularly updated calendars of our competitions that I think it's really important for you to keep on top of these dates. These are updated in the summer every year so that you can take a look and make sure that you're on top of fall deadlines. These lists include all of our fellowship and grant opportunities for the year. And they have different deadlines. So it's really important to stay on top of those. We really hope that you will take advantage of our frequently asked question sections of our website. We host one for every program, meaning that if you have a question about is your application, is your project eligible for a program, what kind of information do you need to include in a fellowship application? That can all be found on our website and very frequently in our FAQ section. So we really encourage people to draw on those. And just like Daniela Sarnoff mentioned, ACLS also has an essay on our website called Writing Proposals for ACLS Fellowship Competitions that really speaks to the dynamics of our review process, meaning that you are going to have this interdisciplinary peer review at the very end. And so we'll have links to all of this that'll be sent to you, but this is an important piece of, and short piece of literature that I think is worth reading if you're considering applying for fellowship competitions. The final note I wanted to say is that we are also reachable via email, and that will be part of the set of information that you receive. We're happy to receive questions about our fellowship and grant programs via email. Very frequently, they will be pointing you to different resources on the website, but when it's not on the website, when the answer is not there, you really do have to turn to someone at one of our agencies to get an answer, and the best email address for that is fellowships@acls.org. We also post a lot of information on our social media about upcoming competitions, highlighting the exploits of recent fellows, and that can be really important to lead you back to particular projects, particular profiles of people who have been supported by ACLS in the past. Everyone who has received a fellowship from ACLS, their abstracts, their profiles, they're all available on our website. And I really invite you to peruse those to see how people are presenting their research, how they're framing the stakes of their projects, so that can spur some ideas for you if you haven't been much involved in submitting applications for support, that you not do this on your own, that this is a team sport, that you look to us and our agencies as opportunities to learn about how we've supported other scholars in the past, and that you tell us through the means that are available through email, etc., what kinds of work you're doing and how you want to, what kinds of support would be useful to you at your institution, in your department, to make those projects succeed. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn this over or ask my colleague Javon Bickerstaff, who's the Senior Program Officer for Higher Education Initiatives at ACLS, to join me and the rest of our panelists in a sort of an opening set of question and answers before we open the entire, open the Q&A to everybody in the room. I wanted to remind everyone who is a participant in the webinar now that there is a Q&A button. It should be at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, and you're welcome to add questions there. We will be drawing from those in the Q&A section that follows the Javon's and my overview of frequently asked questions. Javon, welcome.
Thank you, John Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today. As John Paul mentioned, my name is Javon Bickerstaff, and I'm the Senior Program Officer for Higher Education Initiatives here at ACLS. And I first just want to thank all of our panelists for offering so much insight into their fellowships and their programs and giving us some behind the scenes views of everything that goes on in their programs. John Paul and I have a few questions about application strategies to peel things back a bit more. So the first question to kind of open things up is, if you have people who are applying, one of the questions that might come up is, how can I demonstrate that my project is a great fit for a research center, for instance, for the Newberry or the National Humanities Center?
I'll go. I'm happy to take that one, or part of it. And one of this actually gets to a question that has come up in the Q&A. So someone has asked about thinking about archival collections as being broadly described. We have, the Newberry has 500,000 maps. And you're like, I would love to study maps, but I don't need to see all 500,000 of them. But how do I say which ones are going to be useful, or how I can talk about those? So I think that some of the strategies that have mentioned sort of in my presentation about getting in touch with librarians and research staff, asking questions and making new friends, which I know sometimes can be daunting from somebody who is habitually terrible at that myself, and I've had to work at that as a skill. But sending emails of introduction and saying, these are the things I'm interested in. It looks like you have X, Y, and Z. Can you help me think about how this can be supportive or useful in my project? Seeing what is available and knowing that you don't have to say, particularly for research libraries, you don't need to say, I want to see, these 15 books in this particular order or these items. You can name, whole collections. Like if you're interested in Native American ledger art, which is something that the Newberry holds, very specific example, but we have a lot of that. So, even just saying that your collections in this particular area support my project in this way is a way to indicate that our reviewers know that you have done the homework to sort of look through and know that this is a good fit for what you want to do. And also you're demonstrating how what we have is in support of this amazing project that you are working on.
I just wanted to tag onto Keelan's wonderful comments. The National Humanities Center does not have a research library in the way that the Newberry with its magnificent collections of materials does. And so people come to the center to write up and to complete writing projects. Often they have, however, I think where we share something in common is that it's important that you've already done your homework, that you have a good sense of how your project is flowing. Once you're at the center, our librarians, who are world-class, can bring you materials from the Triangle Research Libraries at Duke, at North Carolina State, and at UNC, and across the world. So we can support all of the secondary source materials, the books and so on that you need. I think the crucial point, as Keelan said earlier, is to have your homework done. So it's clear that your project is ready to be written with some additional supportive materials that you get at the center.
Very good. Well, there was a question, I know that Daniela mentioned this earlier, and so did a number of you, about reference letters, and this comes up quite a bit. And so I wonder if you could, if folks could say a little bit about the purpose of reference letters in your application review process, and what is your standard advice to applicants in selecting their reference letter writers, to the extent that reference letters are required by your process, and how do you advise people who say they might not have active networks of scholars to turn to aligned with their field, or they might be the only person at their institution who does X. How do you usually advise them in selecting reference letter writers? And anyone can start off in answering that question.
Sure, I don't mind trying to start off with that one from the NEH perspective from individual grants. Most of those individual grants that I listed do request 2 letters of reference for your proposal, and they are not required for the proposal to be eligible. So if for some reason the letter or letters don't come in, your proposal still goes through a peer review process. And I think peer reviewers evaluate those letters in different ways. I usually would suggest, if you can find someone who knows your project well and can write about the current stage of your project and for what you are seeking support, that can be more helpful than a letter from someone who might be quite prominent in a field but has maybe not kept up with your research, or was more familiar with the prior work. So that's one thing. It can be helpful to have someone outside of your institution for those letters, but that's not a requirement, nor is it necessarily the best. So those are 2 things that come to mind for letters of reference from my experience.
Thank you. I want to add to that I agree with everything you've said, Mary, and I'll just say that the one thing, it is really great to have someone who's familiar with your project, and that means that as part of, if a reference letter is requested as part of an application, it's really good to start working with the person that is going to be providing that reference letter as early as possible. It could be that you share a draft of your proposal with that referee so that they know exactly what argument you're making if they're familiar with your project and can recommend it. It's also important that your referee is providing a different perspective, that they're able to validate the claims that you're making about the work you're doing, but also able to provide a different voice or a different way of looking at the project or your particular contribution to a scholarly project. And that is all valuable real estate in an application. When you only have 5 pages to describe your project, the reference letter really provides another opportunity for someone to say more about your project. And that's why, in addition to being a very good practice and just courteous to the reference letter writers who are often very busy writing a number of these, to be able to take the time to acquaint them with where things stand and allow them to see, oh, this is how I could bolster the case for this proposal.
Yeah, and I know it's funny for me to speak on this since I just said that the program I run has gotten rid of letters of reference, but I did want to add to that that as we were happy to get rid of the things that we felt were a problem in the letters, and I've mentioned some of those, but we did feel that something was lost. And one of the things really connects to John Paul, what you were saying, is another perspective on the research, but actually even more than that, the researcher, right? So that there are ways in which a letter writer can put in aspects even of someone's background, context, connection to the work that's personal, that as the writer of the 10-page proposal, you might not find the spot for in an otherwise, fairly specific genre of a professional application. And so when we got rid of letters of reference, at least for IDRF, one of the things we added was a personal narrative brief, right? 300 words, asking people specifically sort of about their non-academic connection to this, or how it is in the process of their life and their intellectual development they came to this topic, right? Trying to fill in some of the very things I think, John Paul, you were getting to, right? I mean, that is, we're not just these pure automatons of bibliography or something, right? And so that's something to keep in mind if you are having a reference writer, that perhaps there is something you would like noted there that would be more appropriate perhaps in the form of a letter than in a 10-page proposal. And obviously also echoing what you said, I mean, Well, so much of what you said, yeah, I mean, I would for sure, this is something Mary said, go with somebody who knows your work as opposed to what you think the biggest splash of a name is, because those are very different kind of letters that they will write. And I think the one in the end that captures something like a selection committee is one where they're clearly familiar with the person's work. And also, of course, then connected to that is make sure you give them the most recent iteration of whatever it is you're sending to the funding organization, right? Perhaps as you've been writing, you know, your focus has changed. So just make sure they're aware of those things. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So one last question before we jump into the open Q&A is, if you're thinking about the resources that you have on your website, and again, we're going to send out a number of the links after we run the webinar. But if you're thinking about your websites for potential applicants, what are the best resources for prospective applicants on your websites if they're thinking about where do I begin?
Let's see if I can take that one quickly. The most important one, the one I'm happiest about and proudest of, is our frequently asked questions section. And those have evolved over time, and I've just updated them with some great help from our current fellows this year. So the base website is nationalhumanitiescenter.org, become a fellow, but you can also go to that site and you will find attached become a fellow / FAQs. So if you go to our frequently asked questions link at the bottom of our become a fellow page, the application page, you'll see a lot of answers to questions, some of which are the ones popping up in the Q&A that we're getting on the right-hand side of our screen. And I think those are especially helpful if you're a first-time applicant. Some of our applicants reply several times. Others are first-time applicants to any grant fellowship or any fellowship program. I think those frequently asked questions are really helpful.
I'll say for the Newberry that our website, again, well, website, of course, but we have a how to apply page. And so it's newberry.org /how-apply. And that sort of lays out the steps of what the application process looks like, with including links to kind of more detailed information about what is the eligibility requirements, what are the differences between a long-term and a short-term fellowship application, what are some of our core collections. So it bumps you back out to the wider Newberry collection to sort of think about how it might be a fit. And then, of course, the beautiful page that we all work so diligently on, which is our FAQs that, like Matt has said, get updated every year as we field more questions and as we are adjusting our program, you know, year over year. We're always trying to make things better for our fellows, for our applicants. And so that's always a good place to start. I think that, so for the Newberry, newberry.org /how-apply.
On the website, I think if you already know which program you're thinking you might be interested in, we have pages for every single grant opportunity at NEH, and we call them a program page. It's the first page you land on about that grant program. It gives you a paragraph to 3 paragraphs describing the purpose of the program. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, it will tell you the funding amounts, the deadlines, and that kind of eligibility information. And then on that same page, we will have application samples. Those are real applications we have received that have been successful, and in a variety of topics that have been presented to NEH successfully. And then we also have the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is really the key document from the NEH perspective to look at for all of the information about the purpose of the program, what your application should look like, how long the narrative can be, for example, how to go about putting in your proposal, how it will be evaluated, and also the timeline. So when is the deadline and when will you find out the results, and when can you begin your period of the award period. So I would look at the program pages. We also have funding ratios. So the success rate for each of our programs will appear there, averaged over the last 5 years. And if you're just learning about NEH and wanting to learn more about what are the kinds of programs, what kinds of projects can be supported. One place I might suggest this year, since they're brand new, are these virtual webinars we've been doing. As I mentioned, we've done a variety of topics, including one that was an overview of the agency's work with HBCUs and in support of HBCUs, and recent awards that have been made, as well as grant opportunities. And then the other one that is pertinent to today's topic was done just last Thursday, and there's a recording for all these webinars. So that might be a place to get started if you want to look at those. But never forget that we also will be very happy to receive your call. That's one of the most enjoyable aspects of our job is to talk with applicants about their projects and help you find which program might be most suited to what you want to do. So thanks.
I want to add one resource that's on ACLS's website. I hinted at a few in the presentation. We employ an online application portal for all applicants. So that means that you're not going to be mailing anything to us. You're not going to be sending it as an attachment to an email. You're going to be logging into a system, and that's where you're going to be inputting information and noting who your referees are going to be, who your reference letter writers are, et cetera. And for every application, every competition, we create a PDF of what the application looks like. And I really strongly recommend that applicants take a look at that before they start applying, or as they're thinking about putting together a proposal, so you can see what kinds of questions we ask, and you can see what kinds of fields are required, what you have to input into the application form. Very often, we know that you'll be working on your proposal narrative or a writing sample or whatever is required for the application, and you'll be polishing that. And sometimes we find that applicants might be waiting to the last minute to log on to our system and then have to rush through the entire application to get these in. So I really encourage you to go onto our website, read all this stuff as early as you can, well before the deadline, so that you're never in a rush at the very end to submit an application. And if there are any questions that you have about why we're asking for something or what a particular question means, that you have an opportunity to write to us and ask for advice before you are facing down the deadline.
Thank you, everyone. So we want to make sure that we reserve time for everyone for the broader Q&A. And so John Paul and I are going to kind of synthesize some of the questions that have come up in the very, very active Q&A that you all have going on right now via Zoom. And so to kick things off, a couple of you have asked about the differences and the challenges that folks at HBCUs, former professor at Howard here, and other MSIs might have, given their heavy teaching and service loads and less access to research support in terms of grants and in terms of grant writing. And so one of the questions that's come up is, are there any of your programs that have dedicated fellowships for folks at minority serving institutions, or particular kinds of programming to help them to make sure that they have a better advantage as they go into these competitions, given the stretch that they often have on time?
So one of our, so of the three programs I talked about, it's the program I run, the International Dissertation Research Fellowship Program, has a specific outreach. We've created mentorships at 5 minority serving institutions where we have contacted, so again, reminding people this is the one that's for graduate students. And so we have reached out to faculty at this point 10 institutions where we pay them an honoraria to work with up to 10 graduate students to help them through the process, to read the iterations, and we host, and while we host webinars in general, as I know everybody here does, that we've had targeted webinars for the graduate students at those MSIs. So those are the outreach efforts that, again, I can only speak on that specific topic to IDRF, but those are some of the things we have done.
I want to add that while we don't have programs at the moment that are reserved specifically for faculty at HBCUs, HSIs, and MSIs. We're really interested in, we're recruiting peer reviewers from every kind of institution. We are charging our peer reviewers to think about the working conditions of every applicant and to take them seriously as part of the review process. That means we ask you how many courses you teach a year, and that is transmitted to the reviewers. We ask you about how your research may or may not connect with your teaching. We're really interested in understanding, we're not trying to hive off the research as a separate part of your identity. We really want to understand it holistically as part of who you are and as something that is flowing from the work you're doing on your campus and back into the work you're doing on your campus. And so our reviewers are really charged with thinking about that and making sure that those folks who may not have the same resources or time to be applying for fellowships aren't disadvantaged in any significant way because of that process. Now, I will also say that we have instituted a separate small grant program in recent years for people who are in teaching intensive positions, so that if you apply to our central fellowship program and you're not selected, you're still eligible for what we call a project development grant, which means that you could receive a $5,000 grant to advance your research, work on your proposal further, think about it as perhaps to resubmit in a future year. That's not a requirement, but something that will allow you to move your project forward, even if it's not the recipient of the larger fellowship. We want to make sure that the work that is being put in to this process, and we know it is very hard work, and we know that there's very little time in a day for you, for many of you to do this work, that we're finding more ways to reward that work and to encourage you to maintain your connection to the peer review process at ACLS.
I would just add that I echo much of what John Paul just said, and that charge to reviewers is also a part of our process as well, to consider the applicant in their full context as a person and as a teacher as well as a scholar. The other thing I would say is that this is one place where HBCU faculty share much with liberal arts college teachers. For example, the presumption that scholarship, sometimes, unfortunately, the presumption that scholarship is less important than teaching. And tying, as John Paul said, tying your teaching work, the way that you imagine your scholarship in the world, the active nature of the work you do, to your research can often be a great strength. The humanities sometimes are imagined as separate from the world, or not being an applied discipline. And that is true. We are often interpretive in the sense that we don't generate data, new data most of the time. But we are very much, I think all of us in the humanities, deeply interested in human problems, and saying so in your application is important. That's another place to go back to letter writers, where your recommenders can make a difference as well. To talk about who you are as a complete person, as Daniela noted, that is one of the advantages of a letter of reference. And finally, I would encourage you to put that into your own work, both in the way that you write your CV and in the way that you frame your proposal.
Thank you, everyone. So in the Q&A, we have a number of questions about the types of fields that folks might be able to find funding and fellowships for. And so I'm just going to bring up a couple of them. Are there any programs that exist for creative work? We have some theater and some music folks who are posting questions for oral narratives, particularly book length, and for documentaries.
I'm happy to answer from the NEH perspective. And the creative work, those are wonderful questions. My background actually is in musicology, so I am very much fond and familiar with various parts of the music fields. And I would just say that NEH was founded with the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965. And so our agency makes a very clear distinction between the creative and performing arts, which is in the purview of the NEA, versus the interpretation of the creative arts, theory and criticism of the arts, for example, music history or musicology, ethnomusicology. So we make a distinction between the performing arts and the criticism and theory of the arts. And so I don't know if I have more to add to that. I think that's what I'll say for that. Thank you. I should say I did see one of the questions. Someone was interested in doing a volume of music scores and possibly a recording. And we do have at NEH a scholarly editions and translations program. That's for more than one scholar, so you need to be working with another. Or you could apply as an individual to something like the Awards for Faculty or the Fellowships program to do an editions project. We do have detailed information about what would be expected for a scholarly edition in that case. We also read draft proposals. I want to say not for all of our programs, but the Awards for Faculty and the Scholarly Editions program we do. And so that might be something to consider as well if you're looking for to do a scholarly edition, including of music notation.
I will just add that the distinction that Mary brought up about the interpretation versus the versus performance or creative work holds with ACLS too. I will say that we are really interested in what's going on in the humanities research disciplines, and that many of them we see are getting more and more creative in publication. We funded our first ever graphic novel dissertation this year at ACLS, as we see our disciplines, our learned societies embracing new modes of scholarship, new modes of scholarly production. We want to make sure that we're keeping up with that. But it tends to, if you're thinking of applying for an ACLS fellowship, if there's a creative component, it really needs to be complemented by, really driven by the interpretive component, meaning that if you're going to be doing a book or a set of musical scores, or you're pulling them together, and there is a creative side to this where you might be doing a recording as well, there really has to be a significant scholarly apparatus. You really have to do a really a critical introduction to the scores that is involving the kind of interpretive research that is typical in humanistic scholarship. So it can always be part of something, but the thing that is going to qualify it as a significant scholarly project is that work of interpretation. And so just always make sure that that is the thing that you are bringing foremost to the attention of peer reviewers.
I will go ahead and echo both some of what Mary and John Paul have said, but also say that there are some exceptions at the Newberry and other institutions that have specific collections that are based in the arts or in music or in more creative fields. And so there are more institutions that research libraries who are expanding the ideas of what their fellowship product looks like. It doesn't always have to be a monograph or an article or a digital humanities website. We now have one for historical fiction, so writ large. So if you want to come look at the Newberry's collections and write a book, a play, a book of poems, any of those kinds of things, we want to support other kinds of materials. And then depending on what the kinds of kind of artistic and creative output are, the Newberry sometimes has specific opportunities for those depending on their match with the collection, which may be the same across other institutions. If it's thinking of research libraries, that there may be opportunities depending on where your work would fit in or map on those libraries or opportunities.
Thank you, everyone. So to kind of expand on that idea, thinking about the kinds of outcomes or products that might be produced in your scholarship, if you're thinking about applying, do you need to be at a specific university institution, or are there programs that you have that support independent scholars?
I'd love to start here because I'm very happy about this. The National Humanities Center funds a range of scholars. We have supported independent scholars. And again, I hate to plug this over and over, but if you look at our list of current fellows on our website, nationalhumanitiescenter.org, you'll see a remarkable independent scholar who we funded this year. Alexis Gums from Durham, North Carolina. And yeah, exactly. Remarkable. I was right. So independent scholars are historically funded by the National Humanities Center. We have funded lecturers. We fund people regardless of tenure track status, so long as the other elements of the application eligibility apply. Years since PhD, and the fact that their proposal is well along and far enough along to be funded. So we do not bar people on the basis or choose people on the basis of their status, their tenure status, or their the presence or not of an academic job.
ACLS is the same. It's independent scholars are welcome to apply and in fact win fellowships every year. We really do want to work with independent scholars. I'll just stress that we know that you might have different working conditions, different restrictions on you for how you can take the fellowship, and we want to really work with you to the extent that we're able to within the terms of our fellowship to maximize the opportunity for you to pursue your research. I would also suggest that if you are thinking about applying to any one of our fellowship programs, I would just make sure that you read the eligibility requirements very carefully about the timing of when the fellowship has to be taken, just so you are clear on what your capacity is and how you might have to arrange things to be able to take up the award. But I think most of us here would be very eager to work with the scholar to make sure that it works to your best advantage.
I was just going to mention of the two programs, because the IDRF, instantly into acronym world, the one that's about graduate students, yes, of course, they have to be in a PhD granting program. But for instance, the Just Tech program that I mentioned, you do not have to be faculty, you don't have to be at a university. And so let me just say also, I don't run those programs. Please do check our website for or get in touch with the program officer or director there, of course, about specific eligibility. I do not want to steer anybody wrong. But for instance, I know that Just Tech, you do need an institution affiliation, but it is not one you have to, if you will, currently have. That is, you'll be expected to affiliate with a U institution that's appropriate to your research, but that could be a college or university, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a newspaper, it could be a museum, a think tank, and that you'd be indicating that preference and interest in that organization at the time of application, and the Just Tech program would help create that affiliation, right? So that's different than perhaps how some people often think of affiliation. And for the other program, the Legacy Across Space and Time for American Slavery, that is similarly much more a broad notion of affiliation, that is, or both work and affiliation, right? I mean, they're particularly interested in community advocacy, or I'm sorry, community academic collaborations, but this also, as people may, it could be museum work, it could be artistic work, it could be journalistic work. So my understanding of both those programs is it's a much looser understanding than, for instance, the program I run around affiliation and where you need to be housed at the time of both application and of completing the fellowship. Thanks.
I just would echo what others have said, that at NEH, for many of the programs, you don't need to have a PhD or any particular type of degree. We generally, for the individual fellowship programs, don't support current students. So you would need to be finished with whatever degree program you might be pursuing before you could apply. But we have, like the Public Scholars Program in particular, we see a lot of independent scholars applying to that program, maybe from the world of journalism, independent writers. And so I would just check each notice of funding opportunity to see eligibility information in terms of what restrictions there might be. But I'd encourage you to look for the awards for faculty at HBCU's program. That is for anyone who's affiliated with an HBCU. It could be faculty or staff, it could be adjunct, it could be contract positions, tenured positions, or retired. There was a question from someone there, if you still have a connection with the institution. And the other thing is we do support dissertation revisions through many of those programs. I saw a question about that. So please reach out if I can provide more information about NEH on that. Thanks.
I think we're coming up probably onto our last question. There was a really interesting set of questions at the end, Javon. I don't know if you saw this too, about the time investment that goes into.
That's exactly what I was about to underline.
And I would love to do a sort of round robin of some feedback or some advice to those who are asking about the significant investment of time that goes into what is a very competitive process for a lot of our programs, that many people do not win these fellowships, and there are a relatively smaller group of people who do. So how would you, someone who's looking at a program and thinking about those odds, and warily thinking, oh, maybe I don't want to apply, given those odds, how would you suggest they think about the process? Mary, would you mind if I started with you first, and then we just did a quick round, then Keelan, then Daniela, then Matthew?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. And I would just encourage you, everyone listening, to put in applications, and that many NEH programs are competitive, but if you don't apply, you won't receive a grant. And the other thing to mention is that by doing the proposal, even if you're not successful the first time, I would recommend to you to request the reviewer's comments. That's one thing we're proud of with the review process at NEH. You can receive the comments from the peer reviewers. The names are redacted, but you get everything they provide so that you can improve your project or your proposal, have a bit of understanding about the review process, and then resubmit. The applications that are resubmitted, we notice kind of anecdotally, I don't have a number to put to that, but they tend to be more successful. And 2, 3, 4 times. I mean, just you can continue to resubmit, and reach out to NEH staff. We can also talk to you, to the extent that we can about your project and proposal. So I would just encourage you to apply. We know it takes time, but you will be able to request the reviewer's feedback, and so I just encourage you.
I would echo what Mary has said about applying, and also about the feedback. So the Newberry also will give feedback to applicants if they are unsuccessful in their application pool. One way of thinking about these is, I think, something that John Paul mentioned sort of early on, is that it's also a really useful way of refining your project, thinking through your project, speaking about your project to a wider audience, and knowing that this is another piece of writing, that it's the more you do, the better you get at them. As Mary is saying, that as they have been reviewed, the resubmissions get more successful. And so in many ways it is that double bind about the fact that you have to write them to get better at them. And sometimes you don't get them, and it does take a lot of time, but you will get better as you write them. And I think, as somebody noted in one of the questions, there was a question about, maybe a junior and a senior colleague. If you have colleagues or mentors or former dissertation advisors or former colleagues who can, are happy to read through an application for you. I think that sort of building on that network that we have, again, I realize you're asking another level of burden for another person in your network, but it does help to sort of, that again also will move you forward in sort of getting another person on board with what you're working on. So we realize the time commitment that is involved in these things, but there is often, a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. So I would not discourage you from taking some time and focusing on the ones that you're most passionate about.
Yeah. So of course, echoing a lot of echoes, but also I would just make absolutely sure you are eligible for the thing you're applying for. We hate making people ineligible. Whether it's like, oh, it's just the program is not you're not actually doing the things the program said, whether it's the time frame, you need to do this many months, you're requesting less. The minutia that you may think about too, like the page limits, the spacing, all that stuff. We hate making people ineligible. We try super hard to make it almost impossible for you to submit something that's not eligible. But so and partially, of course, because we know it takes so much time. So don't do that to yourself, right? Do reach out to the program. I think certainly it sounds like my colleagues have all here said, and the same is true for SSRC fellowships. If you say, I do this, this, and this, I'm applying for this, this, and this, like, am I eligible? And don't be embarrassed to go back and say, like, well, what about this part? We don't redraft applications, so I don't want to present it that way. But in terms of eligibility, saying, well, I've gotten this and I've gotten this, am I eligible? Just, if you continue to have a question about that, because again, we don't want you to waste your time. You don't want to waste your time, all those things. And indeed, yes, reach out for feedback. I mean, the reality is, I think for all of these programs, of course, the majority don't get it, right? And so what can be learned from it to improve next time? We certainly, for instance, for IDRF, have had people who have applied for the third time and are successful, right? And they get feedback, and that's often an incredibly helpful thing right there. And also, I know this is spreading more work to others, and I know Keelan just said, but if you can have someone outside your discipline read, I would really recommend that, right? Because by the time you we all use language that we forget is just is second nature to us once we're comfortable using it, right? So again, all those things that my colleagues said and then some.
So of course, I'm echoing much of what has been said already and better by my colleagues. I would underscore that we also offer comments from applications on request following the National Endowment for the Humanities on that one. I won't sugarcoat it. The chances of acceptance are very low. We had 638 applications for 36 spots this year, and those are just terrible odds. On the other hand, some of our most successful fellows have applied 8 times. One of our selection committee members pointed out that he applied 8 times before he was accepted. So let me talk about the other benefits of application. It sends a signal to yourself as a scholar, as a writer, that you're serious about finishing a project. It sends a signal to your letter writers that you're an ambitious person who has hopes of publishing this. Maybe the support you seek won't come from the application you applied to, but will come in another way. One of your letter writers might be able to suggest something. It sends a signal to your administrators, your department head, your dean, your provost, that you're a serious, ambitious scholar who intends to publish and to go beyond the work that you've produced so far. And I think those signals are actually critical. That's what motivated me to apply. I was a teacher at a land-grant university for 17 years. I taught a 3-3 load. I applied and I was rejected by the NEH. I applied and was rejected by the National Science Foundation 4 times. I'm really good at being rejected, but those signals, I think, mattered to me and they kept me going. And so I would just say that the benefits of application aren't just in winning. They're in the ways that you signal to yourself and others that you're serious about this.
And I'll just add, pull out something that I think has come through a lot of these comments about that this is very much a team sport and that you do need to be looking to others, your colleagues, your support networks for the kinds of energy that you need to do this work. Engaging in this national peer review process, it's a conversation. You are putting your work in dialogue with what's going on around the table, what other people are working on, and you're getting it in there. You're making it part of that conversation. I think that's an important step, that you're staking a claim to the work that you're doing and putting it in front of people who may not be familiar with that work, but can become familiar with the work through the process of application. And what Daniela mentioned and others about having someone else to read your project, just that kind of the signal there that Matthew was saying really can be important to helping you move a project forward, regardless of the outcome of the fellowship application. The one final thing I want to say is, please look at our websites and take a look for resources, but also look at our guidelines, look at the page length, as Daniela said, you want to pay attention to those very closely, but you also want to be applying for as many things as you're eligible for at a time, so that you are conserving some of that energy, thinking about a way that something that can go to the NEH and to ACLS and to SSRC and to the Newberry and to the NHC can really, you can get as much out of it as possible, and to not have to reinvent the wheel every time you're applying to it for a different set of funding opportunities. I think, Javon, we're a little bit over time, so I want to hand the mic back to my colleague Joy Connolly, who welcomed us. She'll be bidding us farewell at the end of this session. And I want to thank everybody for sticking with us even a little bit over time throughout the Q&A process. Joy?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially to the panelists. That was just terrific. These are, such important programs. They do such important work. I'm glad you were all frank and candid about the competitiveness. That is a fact of our world, and one that, is one we grapple with all the time. But the answer is, not to build up the walls, but to try to invite as many people to apply to these programs as possible. So thank you for the practical mix of practical and visionary words you gave us today. I want to thank also my colleagues at ACLS for making this all possible. John Paul Christie, whom you just heard from, Mary Richter, who helped organize this really from the very beginning, Javon Bickerstaff, Nicole Glotzer, Katya Oltman, Riska Putri, Robert Keogh. Without you, none of this would have worked, and it wouldn't have worked so smoothly. Again, our panelists from the National Humanities Center, the Newberry Library, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the SSRC, the Social Science Research Council. Thank you, all of you, for your terrific answers, and biggest thanks to our attendees for making the time to come hear these experts. You can tell they're passionate about their work, and we know you're passionate about your research and scholarship. So we know we didn't get to every question, especially the more individual ones. We hope you carry through your individual interests in your application, and we hope successful ones in future. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay in touch.